Have you ever felt stuck even without the bars, as if your freedom was priced? Charles Dickens lived that too, but he was not silent. He wrote so that the world would not forget. Today you will understand how Dickens revealed, still in the 19th century, what we are living today, a new form of slavery. Silent, legalized, normalized. Her name, debt. At the age of 12, Charles Dickens learned a brutal truth. Debt can be a prison, not only iron, but destination. His father, John Dickens, was imprisoned for not being able to pay what he should, and with him also fell to Charles's childhood flaw. Sometimes all that was home became abandonment. All that was childhood became work. The boy who dreamed of books was torn from the school and thrown into a dirty shed, where he collapsed labels in grease pots for long hours every day. There, amid the noise of the machines and the acidic smell of glue, he understood that poverty is not just the lack of money. It is the loss of dignity. It is the feeling of invisibility, the look that no one else directs you, the name that is worth nothing in a powered world. And debt, that simple cold word used by banks, turned out to him as a new form of slavery. Not made of shackles but of slips, not imposed by forecasts but by a system that blames the weak and protects the rich. Dickens never forgot that jail. He saw with his own eyes what happens to a family when the weight of debt turns into sentence. The mother broken by the shame, the brothers scattered, the scarce food, the silence of abandonment. And the boy? The boy learned to silence and observe, but it didn't forget. Years later, when he began writing his stories, that trauma reappeared, not as a memory, but as a denunciation. In many of his books, the debt prison figure is present. Unjust courts, children with no future, adults devastated by the weight of unambiguous accounts. All of this came out of his pen as an attempt to free not only himself, but to all who were still chained by broken promises and merciless systems. Your father's jail was the beginning of pain, but also the birth of a mission, Dickens understood early. While the debt is treated as moral fault, thousands will continue to imprison without ever committing any crime. Because sometimes the biggest theft is not the one who takes what is of others, but who builds a world where those who have the least always pay more. In Victorian England, it was not enough to be poor. It was necessary to be publicly humiliated by this. And if you had debt, no matter what the reason, illness, unemployment, despair, the system would throw you at the bottom of the well without any pity. This was how it worked. It was enough, and the police knocked on his door. You were taken straight to prison. No audience, no right to defense, without even a deadline to rearrange your life. And the most cruel, they often also carried their family. Charles Dickens saw all this with his own eyes. When his father, John Dickens, was arrested for not being able to pay what he should, he was not the only one to suffer. The mother, the brothers, were all dragged by the weight of the debt. Misery did not only reach the domestic economy, it reached the heart of dignity. It was as if the state had legalized the shame, and legalized. Arriving a debtor was not just a punishment, it was a spectacle. Society watched, judged, and turned the face. The newspapers exposed names, the neighbors whispered. Children were no longer called by name and became the son of the debtor. It was a label, a brand, an invisible scar that time did not heal. And Dickens, just 12, already understood what adults had no courage to admit. Poverty was treated as a crime, and justice as a stage of cruelty. The writer who would once move the world with his stories grew up seeing his family reduced to a shameful statistics, and he carried this pain in his chest for a lifetime. He knew that what they called the law was often only the legal arm of injustice. He knew that the poor were punished with the weight of shame, while the rich escaped through the cracks of the privilege. This is why so many of their novels portray arrests, courts, merciless inspectors, blind judges. It was not fiction. It was a denunciation. Each character crushed by the system was an echo of the pain he lived. And every reader played by his words was, for Dickens, a small victory against the silence that surrounded the legalized humiliation, because for him, more cruel than duty, it was being treated as unworthy for not being able to pay. And more perverse than being poor, it was to be punished for it with the connivance of society itself. Among the many novels Charles Dickens wrote, few are as intimate and painfully real as Little Dorrit. At first glance, The book just looks like another critic to bureaucracy and the absurdity of English institutions, but between the lines, it hides something much more personal, a wound that never healed. Because little Dorrit was not born of imagination, he was born of memory. It is a contained revolt, a camouflaged complaint of literature. It is, above all, a reunion with the ghosts of his childhood. The arrest portrayed in the book, the dreaded Marshalsea, is not an invented scenario. It was there that Dickens's father, John, was arrested for debt, and it was there, around that suffocating environment, that the boy Charles learned what the world does to who owes and cannot pay. Little Dorrit, the main character, is the daughter of a debtor, just as he went. She was born inside the prison. He grew up in that environment where freedom was an unreachable privilege, and he lived there for years, taking care of his father, how Charles took care of his, even without being able to be by his side every day. In writing this work, Dickens was not creating. I was exercising. Each wall of prison, every insensitive bureaucrat, every humiliation experienced by Amy Dorrit and her father, is a memory transformed into literature. It's as if the author had waited for years to say to the world, "Do you think this is just a story?" It's not. It's the portrait of England that they pretend not to see. The criticism he makes to the Circumlocution Office, the State Department that solves nothing and everything delayed, is not just a joke about the slowness of the government. It is a direct accusation to a system that leaves the poor in misery and still says that it is following the law. And this criticism, made with irony and intelligence, only has the weight that has because it is born of pain. Little Dorrit is, in essence, a statement of war against the perverse logic that turns debt into a perpetual sentence. It is the way Dickens found to free not only his father's memory, but all forgotten families behind the invisible bars of social contempt. And in writing, he also broke free. Because there, on the pages of a novel, Dickens did what the righteousness of his day could not, gave voice to whom no one heard, gave dignity to whom society stole. And it reminded the world that every debt has numbers, but it also has faces, names, and stories that deserve to be told. Charles Dickens, still young, understood something that many adults of his day never saw or preferred to ignore. The society in which he lived was built as a trap, a gear designed for the poor to be born and should be paid and die without ever reaching true freedom. And meanwhile, the rich watched from above, profiting from each fall, with each delay, with each family crushed by the weight of a debt that was never only financial, it was moral, emotional, existential. In Victorian England, taxes were disproportionate, laws written to protect those who already had a lot, and the interest, calculated interest, as if human life could be reduced to a spreadsheet. It was a perverse system where banks had more power than the judges and the poor. No way out. Freedom was promised but never delivered. It was sold in a credit form, announced as an opportunity, but always came with an invisible collar called dependence. Dickens saw it all. He felt it all. And when he started writing, he spared no words. He understood that the real jail was not just made of bricks and bars, but of silent rules that forced the worker to always survive at the limit, under the constant threat of losing everything. The wages were low, the inhuman working conditions, and any slip, a disease, an absence, an unforeseen, could lead to a whole family to ruin. In their works, the rich are portrayed as empty caricatures, indifferent to the suffering of others. Not out of hatred, but by consciousness. Dickens knew that the problem was not only individual, it was structural. He denounced a system that disguised him as justice, but was actually a theater set up to perpetuate the privilege. A cycle where poor rarely was born could escape, and when he escaped, it was at the expense of immense suffering, as he had lived himself. The most disturbing thing is to realize that after almost 2 centuries, the gear that Dickens exposed still continues to spin. Today she has new names: credit card, financing, renegotiation, but the logic is the same. The promise of social mobility still hides a scheme that enriches few and enslaves many. And the question he raised in silence continues to echo. What good is living in a free country if his pocket, time, and soul are chained by debts that never end? Dickens wrote to alert, to wake up, to say that the freedom sold by the system has a very high cost, and who pays almost always is the least. The same society that announces progress is the one that profits from the financial arrest of their children. Dickens lived at a time when debt prison was literal, Homens, women, and even children would stop behind bars because they couldn't afford what they should. It was brutal, visible, undeniable. But today the world seems more civilized. Or is we just learning to better camouflage the currents? What Dickens witnessed in Victorian England turned, evolved, but did not disappear. Logic remains even more sophisticated. Credit cards with generous limits, financing that promises dreams, slips in smiles and loans disguised as a solution. Everything comes packed in colorful advertising, with technical terms that no one fully understands. And little by little, freedom is being exchanged for convenience, quietly for installments, autonomy by dependence. Today, we don't need physical cells to keep someone stuck. The debt is the invisible cell. You keep walking, smiling, working, but you are stuck. Your decisions are no longer yours. They are from the bank. Your time no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the bill that wins on the 10th. Your energy is drained in exhaustive journeys, not to live better, but to survive the charges. The body is free, but the mind is handcuffed. And the most cruel is that all this is sold as freedom. You choose parcel, decide to finance, opt to enter the rotary. But in fact, it is being conducted by a system designed so that you never leave, never breathe. Just like Dickens's time, the gear has been mounted to rotate forever, and you spin along while someone from the top collects profits. Dickens saw early that the debt was more than a number on paper. It was a control strategy. And today, more than ever, she has become the foundation of a silent empire. It is no longer a question of punishing who should, but to keep it owing as long as possible. Because this is what supports the structure, an army of indebted, exhausted, submissive workers. Dickens's scream echoes with scary force in the present. He saw a cruel system and tried to alert the world with his words. And now it's up to us to look around and ask us, are we really free? Or do we just accept a new form of prison, more comfortable, silent, but as oppressive as the cells he knew? For Charles Dickens, the debt was never just a financial matter. It was a sentence. And the worst part of this sentence was not the amount to pay, but all that was lost while paying, the right to choose, to dream, to breathe in peace. He understood very young that who should not only charged, is silenced. His father was thrown into prison, the family sank in misery, and the 12-year-old boy Dickens had to leave school and deliver his own dreams to survive. No one asked what he wanted. No one cared what he felt. The family debt kidnapped everyone's future, and that feeling of impotence would become, years later, in some of the most powerful social criticism of world literature. In Dickens' stories, debtors are portrayed as characters crushed by forces they do not control. They don't have time for rest. They have no voice in decisions. They have no real choices. They live at the mercy of the clock, the boss, the creditor, the next charge. And even when they try to start over, they carry the stigma of who should, as if the error were not in the system, but in the victim. And this is the silent tragedy. While society idolizes those who enrich it, it marginalizes those who sink into debt, as if failing were synonymous with moral failure, as if it was a sin, and not often the only way out of hunger, illness, emergency. Dickens saw this wickedness clearly. He lived it, and he used his writing to say what no one had courage: who should, he does not choose, and who does not choose is not free. Today, language has changed, but logic continues. Cards, financing, student debts, renegotiations. The appearance is modern, but the result is the same. Millions of people living under the weight of what they should, suffocated by obligations that steal their joy, freedom, and their ability to dream. Dickens made his pain a complaint. Every work of yours is an appeal, not just for justice, but out of empathy. He knew that as long as society continues to treat the debtor as guilty, he will continue to repeat the same cruelty. Because the problem was never a duty. The problem is a world where it should cancel the right to live. In the novel David Copperfield, Charles Dickens created one of the most emblematic characters of his work, Mr. Micawber. At first glance, he just looks like a comic figure, a kind man, always optimistic but forever indebted, always hoping that something appears. But behind the humor, there is a deep pain. And the most disturbing, there is a mirror. Because Mr. Micawber is us. It is the portrait of the crushed middle class. It is the reflection of the trap that remains alive, yesterday, today, and maybe tomorrow. Micawber lives on promises, loans, small favors. He believes everything will improve, that the tide will turn. But while waiting, sinks. Because the system does not forgive optimism, does not accept delay, does not understand unforeseen events. Just a small expense beyond the account, a penny above the planned, and the abyss opens. As he himself says, revenue of £20, spending 19, happiness. Revenue of £20, spent 21, misery. This simple phrase carries a cruel truth. The life of the indebted is decided on minimal margins. An unexpected medical account, an increase in the card bill, a resignation, and suddenly what seemed under control turns into chaos. Micawber is the metaphor of instability, of the bamba rope where millions walk every day. He dreams, but never reaches. He plans, but never left. He tries, but never escapes. Dickens did not write David Copperfield as pure fiction, wrote as outburst, as a testimony. He met Micawbers in real life, and perhaps it was one of them at some point, and that's why the character thrills so much, because it carries true, because it embodies the modern drama of almost. It almost worked. I almost asked. I was almost free. Today, centuries later, Micawber is still alive. There are other names, other faces. It may be the neighbor, the friend, you. Someone who works, pays bills, makes everything right, and yet lives on the brink of collapse. Because the modern financial system was done for this, keeping most almost free, almost stable, almost happy, but never completely. And Dickens, with his brutal genius, opened this game. It showed that debt does not only destroy finances, it destroys hope, it erodes the dreams. And that the greatest suffering is not in duty, but to live forever, hoping that perhaps one day something appears. Charles Dickens never wrote leaflets, he wrote stories. But within each of them there was a hidden question, a silent choice, a cry that crosses centuries and today falls on our shoulders as an inevitable weight. Money or freedom. Most prefer not to listen. Makes joke. He says that that's the way, that nobody lives without debt, that everyone is in the same boat. But Dickens did not accept this conformism. He saw what the debt does, felt on the skin. He watched his family collapse. He was a child without childhood, worker ahead of time, adolescent without time to dream. And so it has used each page as a warning. If you do not learn to resist, it will be swallowed. The money alone is not a villain. You can feed, support, build. But the problem is when he becomes Sir, when you live in it. When all your energy, your plans, your peace are sucked by the need to keep accounts up to date, while life escapes. The system teaches us how to spend, to install, to consume, but it does not teach us to be free, because freedom makes no profit. Debt, yes. Dickens denounced a world where someone's value was measured for what he should. And today, with other clothes, this world continues. Black cards, increased boundaries, approved at the time credit. Everything sounds like a privilege, but they are actually shackles, bright, comfortable, and tight. That's why this chapter is an invitation, or rather a challenge. Money or freedom? You can't have both if you don't know who is in control. Freedom is expensive, requires difficult choices, requires not to say no when everyone says yes, requires giving up status to have peace. But debt charges something much more valuable. Your soul, your health, your time, your hope. Dickens not only wrote about the past, he wrote about today, and invites us to look in the mirror and decide, because in the end, life is also a book, and every book has a turning point. Maybe yours is now. Charles Dickens wrote about 19th century pain, but his message remains so current that it is uncomfortable. Because today, in the 21st century, millions live exactly like the characters he created, or worse. They are arrested not in brick cells such as Marshallsea's arrest, but in homes suffocated by slips, late accounts, rotating debts, and a constant fear that no one sees, but everyone feels. They wake up early, take a crowded bus, work until exhaustion, and at the end of the month get tired and lack money. They live connected with Wi-Fi and smartphones in their hands, but without quiet chest. They are on social networks, post smiles, share happy moments, but inside they carry a restlessness that does not pass. It is modern slavery, a slavery with the appearance of freedom, a slavery with bank password. They are whole families revolving around the rent, credit card, home financing, car, college, And all this seems normal because the system has normalized. He created such a well-made structure that even those who are in prison believes he is free. And this perhaps is the greatest lens, the silent pain of millions who have learned to smile as they sink. Dickens saw that. He saw that the problem was never only economic, it was existential. It was the imprisoned soul. It was the man reduced to numbers. It was the forced child to grow too early. It was the woman who took care of her children as she carried the weight of priceless beads. It was the silent shame of those who do everything right, and yet you can't get out of the hole. Dickens' literature is a cruel portrait of society that punishes the poor with interest, fines, delays, while rewarding the rich with benefits, investments, and exemptions. And that goes on. Today the language is more polished, but the system is the same. The elite changes its face, the benches of name, but the gear continues to grind them ever. Millions live this pain now, silent, invisible, ignored. And perhaps they are waiting exactly what Dickens tried to give, a voice, a complaint, one enough. He wrote so that we did not pretend not to see, and now it's up to us not pretend it's okay, because the silence of pain should not be a rule, it must be broken. And it begins when we have the courage to see, not all freedom is real, and not all slavery has visible currents. We live in a time when it should have become a lifestyle. Installment is a rule, financing is routine, credit card is ease. Debt became part of everyday vocabulary, as if it were natural, inevitable, acceptable. But the truth, the one that few have the courage to say, is that this is not normal. It is a trap. It is a carefully planned system to seem freedom, but function as prison. Charles Dickens knew this long before any modern economic analyst. He understood that a society that profits from misery, which transforms human vulnerability into business opportunity, is not prosperous, is sick. And it is this disease, transvestite of progress, that still consumes us today. Think about it. What really happens when someone enters the card rotary? When does a family depend on personal credit to buy food? When students graduate in debt that will take decades to pay? The system pretends to offer help, but charges with merciless interest. Extend your hand with one calculator in the other. I smiled as it squeezes the loop. And all this with the seal of legality, with advertising campaigns, with beautiful terms such as access and possibility. But Dickens, with his sharp writing and wounded soul, was not fooled. He knew that a country where the suffering of the weaker sustains the comfort of the richest is inside out, and it pointed to this, with the courage of those who lived on the skin, what many only study, the shame of duty, the humiliation of contempt, the pain of social abandonment. The most tragic is that today, even with all technology, information, and resources, we continue to repeat the same mistakes. We continue to glorify those who profit from the debt of others and blaming those who failed to survive the impossible. And the debt industry, silent and merciless, grows, spreads. Enter our homes for mobile notifications, TV advertisements, contracts that no one understands but everyone signs. It takes courage to face this, to admit that we are sick. That living owing is not freedom, it is control. That we can no longer treat as normal, which has destroyed whole families, suffocated dreams, crushed generations. Dickens left us a history of history. Now, what will we do with this truth? Will we continue calling opportunity prison? Or finally, will we have the courage to break the cycle and look for something greater than credit? True dignity. Charles Dickens didn't just write to entertain. His stories were not created to pull applause, were created to awaken. He knew that while the people slept in the midst of their own currents, the system would continue to win. Therefore, his pen was more than a writer tool. It was a weapon of resistance. Word by word, chapter by chapter, Dickens lit a light within every sleeping consciousness. He did not use direct speeches. I used characters, used suffering, used realism. And it made the reader feel, not just understand, that there was something deeply wrong in the way the world treated the poor, the indebted, the forgotten. His stories were mirrors, and whoever had the courage to look at them would see not only others, but to himself. Today, what Dickens started needs to continue, because the debt gear has changed its clothes, but not on purpose. Still arrest, still suck, still profits. And that's why your message is still alive, burning like an urgent call. You can choose. You can follow as it is, working to pay what should not have been imposed, serving a system that feeds on your exhaustion, or you can awaken, can break the cycle. It can rebel with intelligence, conscience, with courage, not TTT rat just getting out of debt, but leaving the prison mindset. Understanding that your identity is not in the bank's balance, the credit score, the appearance you sustain to look good. Your freedom is not for sale, and no portion is worth the price of your peace. Dickens wrote in a time of unjust grids and courts, but his voice goes through time to reach those who are suffocated by slips, false promises and obligations that steal the soul today. He reminds us that the true revolution begins inside, when you decide that you will no longer be enslaved by the system, nor for the fear, nor the lie of normality. Who wakes up, break currents, and who breaks begins to really live. The time has come to declare, to break the silence, to look at everything that imprisons your mind, your emotions, your soul, and say with courage and truth, I choose freedom, because no one was born to live with a low-headed, debt-controlled bullshit and pressured by a system that pretends to help, but sucks to the last drop of hope. Charles Dickens went through this. He saw his own family sink. He felt shame, impotence, abandonment, but he chose not to accept as destination what the world wanted to impose as a rule. He wrote to denounce, to wake up, to release. And now your choice is before you. Continue living hostage, or assume the power to change history. Freedom is not absence of accounts. It is a presence of consciousness. That's when you decide to stop serving what it gets sick, when you understand that consuming is not synonymous with living, that having is not being, what to buy is not to fill in, and what a real success is not measured in paid portions, but in peace conquered. The revolution Dickens started was not made with weapons, but with truths. And the biggest one is this: every system that profits from your pain needs to be questioned. You are not unworthy for duty. You are no smaller because you are unable to track a standard. You are not alone. Millions are suffocated, but many have already begun to wake up. And now it's your turn. Declare without fear, firmly with faith, I choose freedom. Because choosing freedom is the first step to rebuild your own life with dignity. It is the beginning of a new journey, where the command is not the bank, neither debt nor fear, and you. And as Dickens proved with his life and work, when someone wakes up, the world is never the same. Debt is the invisible current that imprisons millions. But Dickens proved that it is possible to break with it, with conscience, courage, and resistance. Is the choice in your hands? Artificial comfort or real freedom? Short, subscribe and activate the bell here. Each video is a key to breaking the currents of modern slavery.